New at 10 tonight, a heartbreaking story. A 2-year-old boy is dead tonight. His twin sister in the hospital, and a man responsible for watching them is now charged with murder and abuse.
The family's trust and the family friend. In Utah, an otherwise quiet community located about 30 minutes north of Salt Lake City, a young family found themselves juggling the demands of parenthood in ways that might be familiar to many. They had twins, a boy named Alistair and a girl whose name was kept private for safety reasons. The daily routine of caring for the toddlers can be exhausting, preparing meals, changing diapers, tidying up countless toys, and watching for any sign that something might be amiss. In these circumstances, parents sometimes look beyond immediate relatives for help, trusting close friends or neighbors to step in as occasional babysitters. That was precisely how Jonathan Dunn, a man the family casually referred to as Uncle John, came into the picture. From the outside, he seemed reliable and well-liked by the children's parents. He attended birthday celebrations, brought holiday gifts, and even showed up for Loki's Sunday dinners. The twins' parents had grown comfortable with him, grateful for any respite he offered from the unending rigors of childcare. After all, in a tight-knit community, especially one like Roy, people often rely on others who seem helpful and kind. If you cannot trust someone you treat almost like family, many would ask, then whom can you trust? Yet beneath the welcoming surface, Jonathan Dunn carried a history that would have sounded every alarm if fully known. Court records eventually revealed that he had a prior conviction for child abuse back in 2017. The specifics of how he managed to avoid thorough scrutiny remain murky. Whether he managed to keep his records sealed, pled down to lesser charges, or benefited from a system that simply did not register him as a sex offender, the fact remained that his record did not automatically disqualify him from being around the twins. Some people speculated that the parents may have heard vague rumors but chose to dismiss them, thinking perhaps that it was an overblown incident or an unfortunate misunderstanding from his past. Others believe the family never knew about his record at all. Regardless of how the situation came to be, its ramifications were devastating. A man with a known disposition toward harming children had close, unrestricted access to two small, impressionable, and utterly helpless toddlers. This dynamic was ultimately a recipe for the unthinkable disaster that followed. The day everything changed, December 21st, dawned like any other winter morning in Roy. The sky was cool and crisp, and the neighborhood bustled with people heading off to work or running errands. For Alistair, his sister, and Jonathan Dunn, it may have begun in the most mundane of ways. Perhaps the twins were playing around the living room. Maybe Dunn prepared them a simple breakfast. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, something sinister was unfolding. Shortly after 10 o'clock, a frantic 911 call disrupted the calm. Dunn contacted emergency services, claiming that Alistair had fallen off the couch and was unresponsive. When first responders arrived at the modest home, what they found on the front porch would haunt them. Alistair, unconscious and obviously injured, lay completely still. Paramedics rushed to stabilize him, then loaded him into an ambulance headed for McKay Hospital. Despite their best efforts, the medical team pronounced Alistair dead not long after his arrival. At first glance, the parents who had entrusted Dunn with their children that day were blindsided by the news. A fall from a couch, though potentially dangerous for a toddler, seemed an unlikely explanation for such an extreme outcome. Some might have assumed it was a freak accident, but Roy's law enforcement officers were quickly skeptical. Alistair's injuries, especially the bruising on his face and body, and the severity of the trauma to his head, did not align with a simple slip. Even the most ordinary household fall rarely results in widespread bruises across multiple areas of the body, let alone life-threatening injuries. Inside the house, officers found Alistair's twin sister. She showed signs of physical abuse later. Doctors diagnosed her with a brain bleed that required immediate hospitalization. The mere presence of these injuries cast an entirely different light on Dunn's story. Whatever had happened, it was no accident. Instead, it was an assault, pointing to the horrific possibility that the very man designated as caretaker may have been an aggressor. Criminal past resurfacing. The day's horror only intensified once authorities discovered Jonathan Dunn's name in existing court records. Back in 2017, he had been convicted of child abuse. Why did no one appear to have flagged him as unsuitable for babysitting? This question resonated not only among investigators but across Roy and neighboring towns as well. Some local residents demanded to know if the judicial or child protective system had failed to monitor him. Others asked why the parents would allow such a person near their children, though many pointed out that blame belongs to the abuser, not the misled parents. The more that emerged about Dunn's background, the more perplexed the community grew. In certain states, not all child abuse convictions result in mandatory sex offender registration. Factors such as plea bargains, the level of the offense, or the specific legal statutes involved can mean that a conviction of child abuse may not always require the individual to register. In some cases, prior abuse convictions do not even appear on a publicly accessible registry, leaving families and employers in the dark about a person's dangerous tendencies. It was into this gap, apparently, that Dunn had slipped, placing the twins in a perilous situation they could not possibly have foreseen. Local media outlets investigated the matter, questioning how a man with that history could maintain close ties with a family that had no idea, or at least no full comprehension of the potential danger. Interviews with neighbors and acquaintances yielded variations of the same response. People described Dunn as quiet, a little withdrawn, but never openly menacing. He had never stirred suspicions in the typical sense of an aggressor. Yet behind closed doors, as the case revealed, he exhibited violent and disturbing behavior. Investigative revelations. In the immediate aftermath of Alastair's death, Dunn attempted to maintain his story that the toddler had fallen from a piece of furniture. He likely hoped that, in a frantic scenario, paramedics and police might accept the narrative. However, law enforcement, guided by their experience with domestic violence and child abuse cases, noticed far too many discrepancies for this version to hold any weight. Confronted with inconsistencies, Dunn reportedly changed aspects of his story multiple times. He stumbled in describing precisely how Alastair had fallen, neglected to account for other bruises on his body, and seemed evasive when questioned about the condition of Alastair's twin sister. Ultimately, faced with physical evidence and pointed interrogation, he admitted to appalling conduct, throwing the children onto a bed in a twisted game of abuse, punching them if they cried, and even subjecting them to sexual abuse. For investigators, these confessions align all too well with the injuries the medical team observed. The scope of violence inflicted was extensive. No single accident could have caused that level of harm. Medical professionals found bruises on the children's heads, faces, and genitals. The pattern of these injuries strongly indicated repeated blows or intentional force. Dunn's own admissions corroborated these medical findings. One of the more disturbing details was that he gave Alastair cough medicine and Tylenol after the abuse, as though trying to quell the child's pain or reduce the obvious swelling that would raise alarm. He also administered some form of children's sleep aid to Alastair's sister, perhaps hoping she would remain quiet or less aware of the trauma he had inflicted. By the time he finally called 911, Alastair's condition had deteriorated beyond the point of saving. The entire community recoiled at these revelations. How could anyone be capable of such cruelty, particularly toward toddlers? The sense of shock was magnified by the realization that Dunn was not some unknown intruder, but a family friend and uncle figure who presumably had the parents' utmost trust. Emotional and legal complexities. Charging Dunn was straightforward in terms of listing criminal offenses. The evidence suggested multiple acts of violence. However, The emotional burden on law enforcement, the district attorney's office, and the surviving family members was immense. The charges filed included aggravated child abuse, aggravated sexual abuse of a child, and aggravated murder, a trifecta of grave offenses that reflect the severity of what had happened. Under Dunn's watch, child murder is rare enough, but a murder accompanied by sexual abuse is rarer still. A common challenge in such cases is that children so young cannot speak for themselves, let alone testify in court. Usually, a prosecution heavily relies on the victim's testimony to clarify the details of the abuse. In this circumstance, 2-year-old Alistair had died, and his sister, though alive, was also too young to give a statement. Investigators therefore depended on forensic analysis such as bruising patterns, autopsy reports, and potential DNA evidence, along with any direct admissions from Dunn himself. Commentators with legal backgrounds, including former prosecutors interviewed by local media, underlined a chilling reality. Most child sexual abuse crimes are perpetrated by individuals who already have the family's trust. This familiarity makes detection difficult. Children do not typically suspect danger from a friendly adult, let alone an adult who might bring them toys or tuck them in at night. Fear and confusion prevent them from revealing the abuse. They might believe they did something wrong to deserve punishment, or they may assume their parents will not believe them over a trusted adult. The family's grief weighed heavily on the entire community. The parents, devastated by the betrayal, not only had to face the loss of Alistair, but also the severe trauma visited upon their daughter. They released a brief statement to media outlets, thanking the public for its support while requesting privacy. It was clear they had never imagined a scenario in which a close friend would commit such atrocities. The court proceedings and plea deal. Legal processes in homicide cases often stretch out over many months or even years, as attorneys gather evidence, file motions, and consider possible defenses. Dunn's case was no exception. However, a key development emerged when he ultimately pleaded guilty to multiple charges: 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse of a child, 1 count of aggravated child abuse, and 1 count of aggravated murder. This plea allowed the state to bypass a protracted trial that might have dragged the family and surviving twin through the ordeal of testifying or facing disturbing courtroom exhibits. One of the central issues in deciding whether to accept Dunn's plea concerned the possibility of the death penalty. Capital punishment remains legal in Utah under specific conditions, and, at first glance, the crimes Dunn committed seemed to fit the threshold for its consideration. Still, prosecuting a death penalty case requires a monumental effort. With numerous appeals and a long timeline, many families find themselves emotionally drained by these lengthy proceedings. By accepting Dunn's guilty plea and removing the death penalty, the prosecution ensured that he would receive life in prison without the possibility of parole. This outcome effectively ended Dunn's freedom forever, giving him no chance to harm others or eventually reemerge from incarceration. Yet some members of the community criticized the arrangement, feeling that a life sentence was insufficient given the gruesome nature of his crimes. Others, including certain victim advocates, supported the plea deal, arguing it was more merciful for the family, sparing them from reliving the tragedy repeatedly. In a drawn-out trial and a seemingly endless appeal process, the question of whether justice was fully served in this deal remains a matter of personal and public debate. The primary consideration for many was the safety of the surviving child and the desire to avoid additional trauma. So, while some might have hoped for a harsher penalty, there was also relief in knowing Dunn would remain locked away indefinitely. Community reaction. Roy, Utah, prides itself on being a family-friendly locale with friendly neighbors and a modest crime rate. The news that a 2-year-old boy had been murdered under the care of a supposed family friend sent shockwaves that reverberated far beyond the city's borders. Local news stations picked up the story, and as details emerged about Dunn's previous child abuse conviction, the outrage grew. Parents throughout Roy felt a chilling realization: if this happened to a family, who thought they knew and trusted their babysitter. Could it happen to them? Immediately, discussions about best practices for childcare surfaced on community social media pages. People began asking more questions about who they allowed around their children. Calls for legislative change started echoing in city council meetings, with residents demanding stricter rules for individuals who had any kind of child abuse record. Some lobbied for a new or more robust registry that would list not only sex offenders, but also those convicted of child abuse, enabling parents to quickly and easily check someone's background. Vigils were organized in honor of Alistair, with candles and stuffed animals placed in front of the home where he had been found. Religious and secular groups alike held memorials, sometimes reading short passages about the importance of protecting the vulnerable. This was no longer just a private family tragedy. It became a stark example of how quickly trust can be betrayed, and how devastating the consequences can be when the trust is placed in the wrong individual, offline and online. Debates raged about how much responsibility the parents bore for not uncovering Dunn's past. However, a majority view recognized that Dunn's deception was the true core of the evil. He had used his benign demeanor to penetrate the family's inner circle. While some critics insisted the parents should have probed more thoroughly, many others empathized, acknowledging that no one anticipates a trusted friend harboring such malevolence. Aftermath and reflection. While Alistair's life ended on the December morning, his sister survived the initial assault. She endured a brain bleed that alarmed doctors. Neurologists and pediatric specialists examined her, uncertain how the trauma would affect her long-term development. Brain injuries in early childhood can lead to a range of outcomes, from full recovery to lifelong neurological issues. As the months passed, updates on her condition remained private, but close family friends suggested that she faced a long road ahead, possibly involving physical therapy, counseling, or specialized education. The parents, for their part, were forced to carry on with a staggering burden of grief. They had lost a son in the most violent circumstances imaginable and felt responsible, in some measure, for inadvertently enabling Dunn's access to their children. The community offered what support it could: fundraisers for medical expenses, meal trains for the family, prayer circles, and a general outpouring of sympathy. Yet the heartbreak of losing Alistair was immeasurable, made even worse by knowing how preventable his death might have been if Dunn's past had come to light sooner. Child protection advocates in Roy used this tragedy as a rallying cry for greater awareness. They stressed that formal or informal babysitters alike must be vetted whenever possible. People were urged to run background checks or at least Google the name of anyone they were considering to watch their children, even if the person came recommended by a friend or relative. The case also highlighted how vital it is to speak up about any rumors or uneasy feelings, rather than dismiss them as baseless gossip. Had someone discovered Dunn's record or recognized concerning behavior earlier, many believed Alistair's life could have been spared. Critics of the existing legal framework argued that Dunn's ability to avoid significant monitoring after his 2017 abuse conviction exposed systemic failures. They pushed for more stringent laws that, at the very least, require stricter probationary oversight or mandatory child abuse offender registration, especially for crimes involving minors. Some advocated that any child abuse conviction, regardless of whether it meets certain felony criteria, should raise immediate red flags whenever someone seeks to care for children, even informally. Nevertheless, legal complexities often slow such reforms. Plea bargains, minor technicalities, or outdated statutes can limit the data that ends up in registries. Civil rights concerns over what information is shared publicly also rise. The end result is an ongoing debate. How can society protect children from repeat abusers without overstepping individual rights or clogging the judicial system? The broader impact on child safety awareness. Beyond Roy, news outlets in larger cities like Salt Lake City picked up the story. Commentators on talk shows spent segments dissecting the infiltration of predators into family units. listeners called in to express sorrow and frustration, and experts in child psychology weighed in on the signs of abuse parents might watch for. Meanwhile, national child advocacy groups cited the case when discussing the frequency with which abusers are known to their victims, often intimately so. These discussions gave rise to heightened awareness in many communities, not just Roy. Parents started double-checking their babysitters and carefully observing children for changes in behavior that might indicate maltreatment. Teachers and daycare providers took renewed notice of bruises or sudden behavioral shifts, reevaluating whether to refer certain cases to social services. Child safety organizations ramped up campaigns emphasizing that trusting a relative or close friend is not, in itself, adequate protection. They recommended frequent, unannounced check-ins when someone else is caring for a child, particularly if the child is not yet verbal enough to describe what happens during babysitting sessions. Interestingly, some also pointed out that while background checks are crucial, they are not foolproof. If an abuser has never been caught or convicted, no record might appear. Dunn, however, had a conviction, making it all the more tragic that it did not surface in time. The debate highlighted how partial record keeping and inconsistent reporting across jurisdictions can leave parents unknowingly exposed to danger. The final sentencing and public response. When Jonathan Dunn's sentencing finally came, it was a moment of grim resolution for the people of Roy. He stood before the court, having already entered guilty pleas. The judge imposed a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Dunn would remain incarcerated for the rest of his days. Though some had cried out for the death penalty, legal experts noted that life imprisonment accomplished the same central goal, preventing Dunn from ever rejoining society. Public response to the sentencing was mixed but mostly fell into two camps. One side felt that justice had been served, believing the indefinite removal of Dunn from the public was a relief, sparing the family from any chance of seeing him roam free. The other side believed nothing could truly address the enormity of his offense. They saw life without parole as the least that could be done for someone who committed such atrocities. But they also questioned whether the legal system should not have demanded an even harsher penalty, like execution. Nonetheless, the result stood. Dunn would never leave prison alive. The parents did not appear at major press conferences afterward. In a brief public statement, they expressed hopes for healing and again thanked the community for its incredible support. They asked for continued privacy, wishing to grieve and help their daughter recover away from the spotlight. Ongoing healing and remembrance. Alistair's name remains etched in the collective memory of Roy, Udall. His story sparked important discussions about child safety, background checks, and the heartbreak of familial betrayal. Over time, the media coverage waned, replaced by fresh headlines. Yet for those who lived through it, the law enforcement officers who responded, the medical staff who fought to save Alistair, and the grieving parents who lost a piece of their world, this case remains an open wound, a constant reminder of how fleeting safety can be. Occasionally, local organizations still hold candlelight vigils or charity events in memory of child abuse victims, citing Alistair's case as a poignant example. In these moments, the community reflects on how swiftly normalcy can be upended when an abuser lurks within a household's inner circle. Child-focused charities, drawing on the lessons from Roy, sponsor educational programs about warning signs and the importance of open communication with children, no matter how young they might be. While the surviving twins' condition is not widely publicized, those close to the family report that she continues to receive medical care and therapy. A young child's brain is still developing, so there is hope for neurological plasticity and adaptation. Even so, the trauma of the day may cast long shadows over her development. The parents must carry the weight of that reality, doing everything they can to support her physical and emotional well-being. Reflections on trust and protection. If there is any silver lining in this tragedy, it lies in the wake-up call it provided to many families. Human nature leans heavily on trust. We build communities, friendships, and extended family networks that help us manage the demands of daily life. Yet this case exposed a vital truth: trust, especially where children's well-being is concerned, must be tempered with caution and verification. Parents are encouraged to check references, look into someone's background, and monitor interactions, particularly with younger children who cannot yet articulate their experiences. Advocates stress that vigilance should not spiral into paranoia, but rather strike a balance. Good people exist, and communities can thrive when members support one another. However, simply labeling someone as a family friend does not guarantee safety. Genuine security for children often requires a blend of open communication, routine check-ins, and a willingness to intervene if something feels off. Several legal experts and child safety organizations use the Dunn case as an example in training sessions for social workers and law enforcement. They pointed to it as a moment where both the system and personal oversight failed. The system did not ensure that a convicted child abuser was closely monitored. The parents presumably did not uncover Dunn's conviction before granting him substantial caregiving authority. Both angles contributed to an environment where a horrific outcome could occur. Lingering questions. For Minnie and Roy, unresolved questions hover like a storm cloud. Could Alastair's death have been prevented if the parents had been more vigilant? Should the courts have imposed stricter post-conviction measures on Dunn in 2017? Could a friend or neighbor who suspected something have intervened earlier? Hindsight is tragically clear, yet it offers no way to reverse the past. Some reflect on a broader sociological perspective, even in a place like Roy. Known for suburban calm and shared values, the presence of evil can be well disguised. Dunn's outward appearance of normalcy, attending dinners, giving gifts, playing with the twins masterfully, hid his capacity for cruelty. This duality served as a disturbing illustration of how abusers can embed themselves seamlessly into family structures, exploiting any reservoir of trust. Meanwhile, a smaller number of observers direct criticism at the justice system, especially any judicial oversight that might have flagged Dunn the moment he sought custodial rights or babysitting roles for children. They argue that child abuse convictions should trigger automatic alerts to child welfare agencies, making it impossible for an offender to care for minors without strict supervision. But statutory reforms can be slow, and attempts to pass sweeping changes often spark debates about civil liberties, privacy, and due process. Conclusion. In the end, the tragic tale of Alastair and his twin sister serves as a haunting reminder of how quickly normal life can shatter. Jonathan Dunn, once so welcome in the home that he was called Uncle John, now languishes in prison for his unspeakable crimes: aggravated child abuse, aggravated sexual abuse of a child, and aggravated murder. He will never walk free again, yet no punishment can restore the life stolen from Alastair, nor can it fully heal the emotional and physical wounds inflicted on his sister. Roy, Utah, was forced to confront a nightmare scenario in its midst. Residents who once viewed their town as a safe haven have learned that a single individual can invert that sense of security. Parents now speak more openly about the need for thorough background checks, ongoing communication with children, and immediate intervention when warning signs appear. Child advocates continue to push for legislative reforms that would tighten oversight of anyone with a conviction for harming minors so that no other family endures a similar horror. Through it all, the memory of Alastair remains. His story echoes beyond Roy's borders, surfacing in statewide conversations about child safety and stirring empathy in the hearts of parents nationwide. While the courts have imposed their sentence and local attention has begun to move on, the lessons remain profoundly relevant. Betrayal can hide behind a familiar face, and saving a child's life may sometimes hinge on the courage to question what we normally take for granted. Ultimately, the tragedy underscores a powerful truth, even in the most ordinary settings. Vigilance matters. Trust must be earned with caution, and families deserve safeguards that prevent known abusers from slipping back into caregiving roles. In Alastair's memory, Many hope that better protections will arise, ensuring that no other child suffers a similar fate at the hands of a supposed friend who was anything but. Sometimes, our faith in others can lead to heartbreaking outcomes when placed in the hands of someone who does not deserve our trust. No amount of generosity or good intentions can alter a heart bent on cruelty. Parents who would give anything for their children often must rely on outside help, yet that very reliance can open a door to unimaginable harm if vigilance is set aside. To the two little angels at the heart of this tragic story, we lift up our most heartfelt prayers. May they find peace and healing beyond this world, free from the darkness that stole their innocence. Their suffering should serve as a sobering lesson for all of us. Trust is never guaranteed, even among those who seem closest. Let this be a warning to anyone with children in their care. Question, verify, and remain watchful when allowing others to watch over your kids, especially when they are too young to speak for themselves. True love means not just providing shelter and sustenance, but also protecting them from the hidden evils that can lurk behind a friendly face. Only through constant awareness and caution can we honor the love we hold for our children and ensure their safety in a world that sometimes fails to guard even its most precious lives. We come before you today with broken hearts, lifting up little Alistair and his precious twin sister, whose innocence was robbed in a moment of profound darkness. You alone see the sorrow that weighs on our souls as we mourn the life tragically lost, and stand in support of the surviving child who has endured so much pain. We humbly ask you to cradle Alistair in your loving arms, granting him eternal peace and freedom from the cruelty he encountered in this world. Let him feel no more fear, only the warmth of your gentle care. For his twin sister, we pray for comfort, healing, and strength of spirit as she moves forward in life. Though she has suffered greatly, may her tender heart still find light and hope in the days ahead. We also lift up the grieving parents. Grant them courage, patience, and the assurance that they do not walk this difficult path alone. Surround them with a compassionate community that will help carry their burden and remind them of love's enduring presence in the face of unimaginable loss. Finally, Lord, we pray for every parent and caregiver who hears this story. Stir in them a spirit of vigilance and a commitment to safeguard the little ones entrusted to their care. Remind us that true compassion means taking every measure to protect a child's innocence, even when it demands uncomfortable questions or cautious doubt. Father, in this time of tragedy, may your mercy and grace shine through. May Alistair's memory and his sister's continued journey stand as a solemn reminder that we must love fiercely, watch carefully, and never presume safety without making certain it is earned. We place our trust in you, hoping that these two precious angels will know a warmth and safety beyond any harm this world can inflict. Amen.